Hi everyone, welcome back to your final lesson in the Python programming course. Now that we have our Firebase NoSQL database environment set up, we're going to continue working with Python and Firebase for our final project. Now the objectives for our final lesson is as follows. We're going to develop a very basic project which is going to be a book management system, and we'll achieve this by integrating Python and Firebase. The goal here is to deploy data to a NoSQL cloud database using Python as well as the Firebase real-time database. Now with that said, let's dive right into PyCharm and Firebase and let's get cracking with the development of our book management system. Now before we get started with our scripting environment and building our book management system, there's a couple of housekeeping things that we first need to get out of the way. The first and one of the most important is first to install the Firebase SDK. So to do this, I'll simply do pip install Firebase-admin. Now, because I've already installed the SDK, you'll notice that the requirement is satisfied. Excellent. So with that out of the way, we can continue with the rest of the housekeeping. So I'll close this off, and you want to navigate to your console, your Firebase console. And I'm going to click on build over here, and I'll click on real-time databases, or you could click on real-time database at the top of here. I'll select real-time database, and I first need to create my database. If you want a bit of documentation on how this database works, feel free to have a look through the resources and materials. So I'll click on create database. And now I need to set up the location of my database based on your preferences. In my case, I'm going to stick to United States. I'll then say next, after which I have to apply the security rules. I'll start off in test mode since this is just for demonstration purposes. However, do keep in mind, normally in test mode, your database might just be public. So I'll click enable over here. And now my database has been created. This is the URL which points to my database, the specific database, my NoSQL database. And I'm going to copy this at a later stage because I will need this in my Python environment. Next, I'm going to boot up my PyCharm IDE, and then I'll start importing the required modules and the SDK. So I'll start off with import Firebase_admin, and from Firebase admin, I would like to import the credentials, and then I also want to do from Firebase admin import the database. So these are some of the most important things that I need to create my database and to interact with my database. First, I need my credentials for my specific environment, and then next I need the database features or package to actually interact and start to build my database. Now, let's start off with the credentials first. If we head back over to our console, the first thing that we want to do is get the configuration script for setting up our credentials. So I'll click on this gear icon over here. I'll click on project settings and I'll navigate to service accounts. And now you'll notice that I can choose my configuration setup for either Node.js, Java, Python, and Go. Of course, we are working with Python, so I'm going to select the Python option over here. Now, the only portion of this code that I need to copy are the last two lines over here. We've already imported the necessary packages. So I'll grab the last two lines over here, copy this, navigate back to my Python environment, and then I'll simply just paste this over here. Excellent. Now notice that we have this string called path to service account key.json. We need to replace this path or this specific reference over here to an actual JSON file that has our secret keys that we can generate inside of our Firebase dashboard. So I'll navigate back to my dashboard and then I'll click on generate new private key. Also keep in mind that if you are working in a production environment or if you're working on a personal project, this is not a file that you want to share on a public repository. So I'll click on generate key. This will then download the key. I'll take this key and I'll simply drag that into my Python environment. I'll make sure that it's within the lesson 8 folder where the main Py file is. And then I'll click on refactor. And then I'll simply go ahead and rename this. I'll head over to Open in Explorer, and I'm going to rename this to something a little bit more reader friendly. So I'll call this Firebase-SDK. We want to maintain the .json extension at the end. Great. So now that we have our file, our secret key set up, we can navigate back over to our PyCharm environment, and we want to reference this path over here. So what I'll do is I'll just change this path to Firebase-SDK.json. And that is now a certificate reference to the JSON file that we created, or that we added over here. Excellent. There's one more thing we need to do just to make sure that our database is connecting. So when we initialize the app, we need to pass in our database URL. So I'll navigate back over to my dashboard, click on the real-time database, and then I'm going to copy the URL reference over here. And then back inside of PyCharm, we want to add some code over here. So I'll start off with a comma because I'm going to add an extra parameter over here, and then a curly brace, provide some spacing, and then I'm going to pass in an object. This object is called database URL, and this needs a value because it's a key pair value, and that is going to be my database URL, which I just copied. Excellent. So let's run our code, and if we have any errors, we can assume there is some sort of configuration issue. However, if the code runs without any errors, we can assume everything is fine. So I'll click on run over here, and process finish with exit code 0. Great. So we know that we have a connection to our database. So let's start off by adding data to our cloud NoSQL database. Now, in order to add data to our NoSQL database, we first have to use a couple of methods, get a reference path, and then create a JSON object to push that data to our database. So on a new line over here, I'm simply going to create a variable called ref. I'll set this equal to db.reference, which is a function of the DB object from Firebase. And then I need to set the path over here as a parameter. Since this is going to be the root, I'll simply just add / over here. On a new line, I'm going to take ref, the variable I created, and I'm going to call the set function on this. Now, this is very, very important because within the set function is where we'll pass our JSON object or our data through so that we can store it on the database. So I'll just give a bit of space over here, and then I'll create a JSON object. And inside of this JSON object, I'm going to have the first reference point as books. And then over here, I need to provide a key pair value. And the key pair value here is going to be another JSON object. You can think of this as a child to the books reference. So I'll open up a new squiggly brace over here, or curly brace. And then I'll simply just paste in the first book that I'm going to pass in. And that's going to be this book over here. Let's also maybe just clean this up a little. There we go. So we have books. Within our books record or reference, we have a child of book 1, and book 1 has specific properties associated with it, or data fields, such as name, the author, as well as the publication date. That's how I formatted this specific object. Remember, in our previous lessons, we worked with JSON objects when dealing with APIs. The same principle applies here when working with JSON objects. So now the next thing I need to do is simply run my code, and we have no errors. Great. So let's navigate back to our environment, and you'll notice that over here inside of our cloud database, we have a record of books. And if I expand this, we have books as the parent. And then we have book 1, which is the first book with an author of Lionel, the name of the book, the mandibles, and the publication date for this book. So let's delete this and let's actually add a bunch of books so that we can manage and update the different fields for these specific books. So I'll go ahead and delete this over here, and I'll start from scratch. Great. Also notice that the data is quite robust, and this is the point with NoSQL databases and unstructured databases, in that the execution is really, really fast. Great. So what I'll do is I'll head back over to my PyCharm environment over here, and now I'll copy and paste 2 additional books. So we want to come to the end of this line of code, add a comma because this is going to be a new entry, and that's going to be the book 2, the name of the book, the Bitcoin standard, the author, Saifuddin, the publication date, 23 March 2018. And then I'll simply go ahead and add 1 more record. So at the end of this line, on a new line over here, I'll add the new book. So let's push this data and see if we manage to get all of the book data published. Let's just clean this up a little. And if I run this now, Great. So if I revisit my console, notice that I've now managed to push a collection of books inside of my database, book 1, book 2, and then the last book over here, Mastering Bitcoin, Programming the Open Blockchain. So now what we can do is we can start updating some of these values in our book, because remember, at the end of the day, if we refer to a book management system, that basically means that we can update values, we can add new books, we can delete books. These are all CRUD operations that we can perform on our database. And the really awesome thing is that all of this data lives in the cloud. So we can actually interface with this data to pull it into various applications. Now back inside of PyCharm, I will simply just take all of the code that I have over here and I will basically block this code out because we are not going to use it. I'll comment this out because we no longer need it. The next thing we're going to do is add a new book to the existing books that we have inside of our database. And to do this, I'll create that ref object again. I'll set this equal to the db.reference. And this time my reference is going to be books. Since I'm no longer targeting the root path, instead, what I'll be targeting is the book's child over here. And the idea here is to add a new book, book number 4, for example. And I can simply use the update statement for that. Remember, previously we used the set. Now we'll use the update. So on that ref object, I'll say dot update. And I need to add my curly braces over here, which is going to be an object once again. And I'll simply just paste in the book that I'd like to add. And let's just clean up our code a little. So we have book 4, the name, Why Nations Fail, the author Darren and James, and then we also have the publication date over here. Excellent. So now I'll push this or update my database. And since book 4 does not yet exist inside of our database, if we have a look now, you'll notice that we managed to add a new book. Also take note of the following. Previously, with SQL and relational databases, we had to enforce constraints such as primary keys, foreign keys, not nulls, and so on. However, with NoSQL databases, because the data is unstructured, the data does not have any sort of correlation and does not require any sort of constraints. Great. Now, let's continue to work with the update statement, and instead of pushing in a new book into my records over here, what I'll do is I'll alter some of the details of book 2. We'll alter the publication date for our specific book over here. So back in PyCharm, I'll comment this code out once again. You can also erase this if you'd like to. I like to just keep track of my code so that I know what I'm doing. And then on a new line, I will create that ref object once again. And then I'll set this equal to db.reference. You could also just copy and paste your references as you go along if you'd like. Again, I like to just start from scratch sometimes. I'll then point to the books reference. And then I want to get books 2 or book number 2, which is a child of books. So what I'll do is I'll say book ref, which is going to be a new variable. I'm going to set this equal to the reference, this reference over here, which points to books. And I'm going to call the child method on that so that I know I'm going to call a child of the books. And in this case, I'm going to call book number 2. Then I want to perform another update statement. So I'll say book ref dot update. And inside of here, I want to add my curly braces. And I need to pass in the key and the value that I'd like to change of book number 2. If we have a look at book number 2 over here, we can see the publication date was 23 March 2018. So let's opt for a different value. First, I need to get the key pair value, which is the publication date. And then I want to update to a new value. So remember, we are now updating from 23 March 2018 to a different value. So I might just say something like 25 May 2023. And if I run this code now and I head back over to my environment, notice that book number 2's publication date has been updated. So this is how we can target individual fields of child objects within inside of our parent object here, which is books. Wonderful. The other awesome thing about the Firebase real-time database is that you can actually change the values with inside of the console over here. So I can actually change this back if I wanted to 23 March 2018. 18, I believe was the date. And that will save the new value. Now let's do a couple more examples. The next example, I'm going to push a value into my database or a field that does not yet exist. So if we have a look at our console over here, if we take a look at book 1, for example, we can see the fields consist of author, name, publication date. Likewise, it's exactly the same across all the other books. We have author, name, and publication date. But what if I wanted to push in a new field such as the ISBN number? The ISBN number, by the way, is a way to track the book based on a serial number. So to do this, I can simply use the push method inside of our Firebase database. So over here, once again, ref is equal to db.reference, and I'm going to point to books, and this time I'm going to target book number 1. So I'll say book underscore ref is equal to the reference dot the child, which is going to be book 1 in this case. And now I'm going to call book ref dot push in a new value. If this value does not exist, it's going to push this in. So I need to open my curly brace once again. And here I'll simply just pass in, we need to create this string over here because this is a JSON object. The key is going to be ISBN. And then I'm going to add the number as a string over here. So this is the ISBN number for book number 1, which is the Mandibles. So now if I hit run, no errors, wonderful, and I navigate back, notice that I've pushed in a new value over here. But also take note that here we have a key. Sometimes we don't really want a key with any new value that we push in. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and delete this over here, and we'll take a different approach. So back in PyCharm, instead of using push, we'll use update over here. And if I run this now, and I have a look at my database, notice that I managed to push the ISBN number in without an auto-generated key or parent, which is exactly what we want. And we can achieve the exact same thing for all of these books over here. So now that we learned how to insert new books and update new books and push new fields into our database, let's take a moment to get data as well as delete data. So this code over here, I'll comment out once again. I'll maintain the db.ref that we had over here to books. And all I have to do to get the data, the JSON object specifically from my database, is simply just to print the ref.get function. And that's basically going to get the collection of books within my reference point over here. So if I run this now, I should retrieve a couple of objects with all my books. So notice we have book 1 over here. And then we also have book 2. We've got access to book 3. And we also have access to book 4. Great. We can take this a step further, and let's say we only wanted to get the data for book 3. For some reason, we can simply just tack on an extra line of code. So then I'll say book ref is equal to the ref dot child, and the child we are pointing to is book number 3. So we only want to get the data for book number 3, and then all I have to do is change the reference over here because we are not printing the ref, we are printing the book ref for book number 3. I can simply change this over here to book underscore ref. And if I run this now, I have only the data associated with book number 3. Now to wrap things up with our book management system, let's do one more example, and here we'll perform the delete operation to delete a specific book from our list. So what I'll do is I'll comment this code out once again, and on a new line, I'll do ref is equal to db.reference, and here I'm going to target book number 2. So first I need to get access to the parent, which is books, and then I need to create a book ref variable, which will point me to the child book of number 2. Over here I'll pass in book 2, and then I'm simply going to call book ref dot delete, and that's all that's required. So let's make sure that our book still exists within our record. So we are targeting book number 2, which is the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean, and all other books should still remain intact. So if I navigate back to PyCharm and I run this code, no errors, great. And if I hit back over here, notice that book number 2 has now been removed from my list. And that is basically it for working with Firebase databases using the Python programming language. This not only brings us to the end of today's lesson, but the end of the Python course. Throughout this course, we've covered both basic and advanced concepts in Python programming. Apart from just learning the Python language, we also applied some of our skills by using some of the most popular Python libraries and frameworks. So where to from here, you might ask? Well, I would encourage you to apply your skills to additional projects in various other domains such as IoT or Internet of Things, machine learning, data science, and even artificial intelligence. Remember that software development and programming are skills that only get better with time and practice. So I hope you managed to learn some really valuable skills throughout this course, and I wish you all the best for your career as a Python developer. Cheers!